The sun dipped below the jagged skyline of New Carthage, casting long shadows over the crumbling remnants of what was once humanity's greatest city. The air was thick with the scent of ash and decay, a constant reminder of the war that had brought the human race to its knees. In the heart of the city, within the fortified walls of the citadel, King Alaric Valen stood atop the observation deck, his piercing grey eyes scanning the horizon. He was the last king of Earth, a title that felt more like a curse than an honor. Alaric was not a man who had sought power. He had been a scholar, a historian, before the invasion. But when the alien empire known as the Kryloth had descended upon Earth, burning cities and slaughtering millions, the old world order had collapsed. In the chaos, Alaric had been thrust into leadership, not because of his lineage or ambition, but because he was the only one who could unite the fractured remnants of humanity. The Kryloth were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. Their ships were sleek and black, their technology far beyond human comprehension. They were a race of conquerors, driven by an insatiable hunger for resources and a belief in their own superiority. They had come to Earth not to negotiate, but to dominate. And for 10 long years, they had succeeded. But Alaric had not given up hope. He had spent years studying the Kryloth, learning their tactics, their weaknesses, and their history. He had discovered something that the Kryloth had tried to erase: their empire was not invincible. They had enemies, other alien races who had resisted their conquest. And if Alaric could find a way to reach them, he might be able to turn the tide of the war. "Your Majesty," a voice called from behind him. Alaric turned to see General Cale Draven, his most trusted advisor and commander of the human resistance. Cale was a grizzled veteran, his face scarred from countless battles, but his eyes still burned with determination. "What is it, Cale?" Alaric asked, his voice calm but weary. "The scouts have returned," Cale said. "They've found something. Something big." Alaric's heart quickened. "Show me." The two men made their way to the war room, a dimly lit chamber filled with maps, holographic displays, and the faint hum of machinery. A group of scouts stood at attention, their faces pale and their eyes wide with fear. In the center of the room was a large, metallic object, roughly the size of a man. It was covered in strange, glowing symbols, and it pulsed with an eerie, otherworldly energy. "We found it in the ruins of Old London," one of the scouts said, his voice trembling. "It was buried beneath the rubble, but it was still active. We think it's some kind of communication device." Alaric stepped closer to the object, his mind racing. He recognized the symbols. They were Kryloth, but they were older, more archaic. This was not a device from the current Kryloth Empire. It was something much older, something from their past. "This is a relic," Alaric said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A relic from the time before the Kryloth became an empire. If we can decipher it, we might be able to find a way to contact their enemies." Cale frowned. "And if we can't?" Alaric turned to him, his eyes hard. "Then we're no worse off than we are now. But if we can, this could be our only chance to save humanity." Over the next few weeks, Alaric and his team worked tirelessly to decipher the relic. It was a painstaking process, fraught with danger. The device was unstable, and there were moments when it seemed as though it might explode, taking the entire citadel with it. But Alaric refused to give up. He spent long nights poring over ancient texts and Kryloth data, piecing together fragments of information. Finally, after weeks of effort, they succeeded. The relic activated, projecting a holographic map of the galaxy. At its center was a star system that Alaric recognized, a system that had been marked as forbidden by the Kryloth. It was the home of the Velari, an ancient race that had once been the Kryloth's greatest rivals. "This is it," Alaric said, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "This is our chance. If we can reach the Velari, we might be able to form an alliance." Cale nodded, but his expression was grim. "And if they refuse?" Alaric looked at him, his eyes filled with determination. Then we'll find another way. But we have to try. For the sake of humanity, we have to try. As the sun rose over New Carthage, Alaric prepared to embark on the most dangerous mission of his life. He would leave Earth behind, venturing into the unknown in search of an ally that might not even exist. But he knew that he had no other choice. The fate of two worlds, Earth and the Kryloth Empire, hung in the balance. And he would not let humanity fall without a fight. The starship Elysium was a relic of humanity's golden age, a vessel designed for exploration and discovery. Now, it was a warship, its sleek hull scarred by battle and its once bright corridors darkened by the shadow of war. As the Elysium broke through Earth's atmosphere, King Alaric Valen stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the stars. He had never been off-world before, and the sight of the infinite void filled him with both awe and dread. The crew of the Elysium was small but skilled, a mix of soldiers, scientists, and engineers who had volunteered for the mission. Among them was Captain Lyra Terran, a brilliant pilot and Alaric's second-in-command. Lyra was a woman of few words, but her sharp eyes and steady hands had saved the Elysium more times than Alaric could count. "We're clear of Earth's gravity well," Lyra reported, her voice calm and measured. "Setting course for the Velari system. Estimated travel time, 6 weeks." Alaric nodded, his mind already racing ahead to the challenges they would face. The journey to the Velari system would take them through Kryloth-controlled space, and there was no guarantee that they would make it through undetected. But they had no other choice. The relic had given them a destination, and they had to reach it, no matter the cost. The first week of the journey passed without incident. The crew settled into a routine, their days filled with repairs, research, and training. Alaric spent most of his time in the ship's archives, studying everything he could find about the Velari. The information was scarce, but he learned enough to know that they were a race of scholars and warriors, a people who valued knowledge and honor above all else. But as the Elysium entered Kryloth space, the tension on board began to rise. The ship's sensors detected Kryloth patrols in the area, and the crew knew that it was only a matter of time before they were discovered. "We're approaching the Kryloth blockade," Lyra said, her voice tense. "If we're going to make it through, we'll need to be careful." Alaric nodded, his mind racing. "Can we avoid them?" "Not without going off course," Lyra replied. "And even then, there's no guarantee." Alaric frowned, his thoughts turning to the relic. It had brought them this far, but it had also put them in danger. He couldn't help but wonder if they were walking into a trap. "We'll have to take the risk," he said finally. "We can't afford to waste any more time." The Elysium moved cautiously through the blockade, its engines running at minimal power to avoid detection. For a time, it seemed as though they might make it through undetected. But then, without warning, the ship's sensors lit up with alarms. "We've been spotted," Lyra said, her voice tight with tension. "Kryloth fighters are inbound." Alaric's heart pounded as he gripped the edge of the console. "Can we outrun them?" "Not a chance," Lyra replied. "We'll have to fight." The Elysium was not a warship, but it was armed, and its crew was well trained. As the Kryloth fighters closed in, the ship's weapons came to life, filling the void with bursts of energy and light. The battle was fierce, and the Elysium took heavy damage, but the crew fought with everything they had. In the end, they managed to destroy the Kryloth fighters, but the victory came at a cost. The Elysium's engines were damaged, and the ship was leaking oxygen. They were alive, but they were far from safe. "We need to make repairs," Lyra said, her voice strained. "But we're running out of time." Alaric nodded, his mind racing. They were close to the Velari system, but they couldn't afford any more delays. "Do what you can," he said. "We have to keep moving." As the crew worked to repair the ship, Alaric retreated to his quarters, his thoughts heavy with doubt. He had led his people into the unknown, and now they were paying the price. But he knew that they couldn't turn back. The fate of two worlds depended on their success. And so, as the Elysium limped toward the Valari system, Alaric prepared himself for what lay ahead. He didn't know what they would find when they reached their destination, but he knew that they had to try. For the sake of humanity, they had to try. The Valari system was unlike anything Alaric had ever seen. The star at its center was a brilliant blue, its light casting an ethereal glow over the planets that orbited it. The third planet, Valar Prime, was a world of towering mountains and vast, shimmering oceans. It was beautiful, but there was an air of mystery about it, a sense that this was a place where secrets were kept. As the Elysium approached Valar Prime, the crew prepared for landing. The ship's sensors had detected signs of life on the planet, but there was no response to their hails. It was as though the Valari were ignoring them, or perhaps they didn't even know they were there. "We'll have to go down there," Alaric said, his voice firm. "We need to make contact." Lyra nodded, though her expression was wary. "We'll need a small team. Too many of us might be seen as a threat." Alaric agreed, and within hours, a landing party was assembled. Along with Alaric and Lyra, the team included Dr. Elias Vorn, the ship's chief scientist, and two soldiers, Yarok and Tessa. They boarded a shuttle and descended to the planet's surface, their hearts pounding with anticipation. The shuttle touched down in a clearing near the base of a mountain. The air was cool and crisp, and the landscape was dotted with strange, crystalline structures that seemed to hum with energy. As the team stepped out of the shuttle, they were struck by the silence. There was no sign of life, no movement, no sound. "This place is eerie," Tessa said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alaric nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Stay close. We don't know what we're dealing with." The team moved cautiously through the landscape, their senses on high alert. As they approached one of the crystalline structures, Dr. Vorn stopped, his eyes wide with wonder. "This is incredible," he said, his voice filled with awe. "These structures, they're not natural. They're artificial, but they're unlike anything I've ever seen." Alaric frowned, his mind racing. If the Valari had built these structures, where were they? Why hadn't they made contact? As if in answer to his thoughts, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The crystalline structures lit up, their hum growing louder, and the air seemed to crackle with energy. Before the team could react, a beam of light shot down from the sky, enveloping them in its glow. When the light faded, they were no longer in the clearing. They were inside a vast, cavernous chamber, its walls lined with more of the crystalline structures. Standing before them was a figure, tall and imposing, its body covered in shimmering, silver armor. "Who are you?" the figure demanded, its voice deep and resonant. "Why have you come to Valar Prime?" Alaric stepped forward, his heart pounding. "I am King Alaric Valen of Earth. We come in peace, seeking an alliance." The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes studying Alaric with an intensity that made him feel as though his very soul was being laid bare. "An alliance? With the humans? Why should we trust you?" Alaric took a deep breath, his mind racing. He knew that the fate of two worlds depended on his next words. "Because we share a common enemy. The Kryloth. And together, we can defeat them." The figure was silent for a long moment, its gaze never leaving Alaric's. Then, slowly, it nodded. "Very well. We will hear your proposal. But know this, King Alaric Valen, the Valari do not make alliances lightly. If you betray us, you will regret it." Alaric nodded, his heart filled with a mixture of hope and fear. He had come this far, but the hardest part was yet to come. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, and he would not let them fall. The chamber was vast, its walls lined with ancient tapestries and glowing crystals that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light. At its center stood a circular table, around which sat the leaders of the Valari. They were a diverse group, their appearances as varied as their roles within their society. Some were clad in ornate armor, their faces stern and unyielding, while others wore flowing robes, their eyes filled with wisdom and curiosity. Alaric stood before them, his heart pounding in his chest. He had spent the last few hours explaining the situation on Earth, the Kryloth invasion, and the desperate need for an alliance. The Velari had listened in silence, their expressions unreadable. Now, it was time for them to decide. "You ask much of us, King Alaric," said one of the Velari leaders, a tall, imposing figure with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. "The Kryloth are a formidable enemy. To challenge them is to risk everything." "I understand," Alaric replied, his voice steady. "But if we do nothing, the Kryloth will continue to expand, consuming everything in their path. They will not stop at Earth. Eventually, they will come for you." The room fell silent as the Velari leaders exchanged glances. Alaric could feel the weight of their decision pressing down on him. He had come so far, risked so much, but it all came down to this moment. Finally, the silver-haired leader spoke again. "Very well. We will join you in this fight. But know this, our alliance is not one of convenience. It is a bond forged in fire and shadow. If you betray us, or if you prove unworthy, the consequences will be dire." Alaric nodded, his heart filled with a mixture of relief and determination. "Thank you. You have my word that we will stand together, no matter the cost." Over the next few days, Alaric and his team worked closely with the Velari to plan their strategy. The Velari were a technologically advanced race, their weapons and ships far superior to anything humanity had ever seen. But they were also a people of honor, and they demanded that Alaric and his crew prove their worth before they would fully commit to the alliance. The first test came in the form of a Kryloth scouting party that had been detected near the edge of the Velari system. The Velari proposed a joint mission to intercept and destroy the scouts, a task that would require precision, skill, and courage. Alaric agreed, and within hours, a small fleet of Velari ships, accompanied by the Elysium, set out to confront the Kryloth. The battle was fierce, the void filled with bursts of energy and the screams of dying ships. But in the end, the Alliance emerged victorious, the Kryloth scouts reduced to smoldering wreckage. As the fleet returned to Valar Prime, Alaric felt a sense of pride and hope. They had proven themselves to the Velari, and the Alliance was stronger than ever. But he knew that this was only the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. The Kryloth fleet was massive, a dark swarm of ships that blotted out the stars. They had come in force, determined to crush the Alliance before it could grow stronger. But Alaric and the Velari were ready. The battle began in the void above Valar Prime, the two fleets clashing in a storm of fire and light. The Elysium fought alongside the Velari ships, its crew battling with everything they had. Alaric stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the enemy, his heart filled with determination. The ship rocked as blasts from Kryloth weapons exploded around them, but Alaric remained resolute. "Report!" Alaric shouted over the chaos of the battle. "We're holding our own, Your Majesty," Captain Lyra Terran replied, her voice tight with concentration. "But we're taking heavy fire. We need to act fast." Just then, a message from the Velari leaders crackled through the comms, cutting through the chaos of the battle. King Alaric, the silver-haired leader said, his voice stern but calm. "We've discovered a weakness in their fleet. There is a vulnerable point in the Kryloth flagship. If we can hit it with a concentrated strike, we can cripple their entire force." Alaric's mind raced. The flagship was heavily guarded, but if they could take it down, the rest of the Kryloth fleet would collapse. It was a risk that could turn the tide of the war, but it was also an enormous gamble. The Kryloth had more firepower and ships than the Alliance combined, and if they failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. "How do we strike?" Alaric asked, his eyes narrowing as he weighed the risk. You'll need to penetrate their defensive lines, break through the outer hull, and strike directly at the heart of their flagship. It will take all of your strength, and we will be vulnerable while you are in the assault position. Alaric stood tall, his decision clear. Then we'll do it. Prepare the strike force. We can't let this chance slip by. The plan was simple but dangerous. The Elysium would lead a small strike force deep into the heart of the Kryloth fleet, targeting their flagship with a concentrated assault. The Velari would provide support, drawing the attention of the other Kryloth ships to allow the Elysium to get close enough for the strike. It would be the ultimate test of their resolve. The Elysium maneuvered through the battlefield with skill and precision, its shields holding firm against the barrage of Kryloth weaponry. The smaller fleet of Velari ships took the brunt of the damage, their sleek vessels darting in and out of enemy fire, distracting the Kryloth long enough for Alaric's ship to get within range. As they neared the Kryloth flagship, the tension was palpable. The ship's engines groaned with effort as it pushed forward, fighting against the overwhelming force of the enemy. Alaric stood at the helm, his gaze unwavering as he prepared to make the final strike. "Captain, get us into position," Alaric ordered. His voice was calm, but inside, his heart was pounding. "We're almost there," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Just a little more." Suddenly, the Kryloth flagship's main cannon charged up, preparing to unleash a devastating blow. The Velari fleet had begun their diversion, but it wasn't enough. The flagship's firepower was enormous, and it would strike the Elysium before they could reach the target. "Prepare to fire the main guns," Alaric shouted, clenching his fists. Lyra made a split-second decision. "Get us closer, fast." She pushed the ship forward, dodging and weaving to avoid enemy fire, narrowly escaping destruction as the massive Kryloth cannon fired. The Elysium's engines screamed as they surged forward, closing the gap between them and the flagship. Just as the Kryloth flagship fired another barrage at them, Alaric ordered, "Now." The Elysium's weapons opened fire, a barrage of energy blasts hitting the vulnerable point in the flagship's hull. The ship shuddered violently, but it wasn't enough. "Target their engine core," Lyra called out, adjusting their position in a sharp turn. They fired again, this time the blast hitting its mark. A massive explosion tore through the flagship's core, sending shockwaves through the entire Kryloth fleet. For a brief moment, it seemed like victory was within their grasp. The Kryloth flagship faltered and began to break apart. But as the flagship's destruction caused a chain reaction, a sudden surge of energy from its dying systems caused multiple ships to collide in a fiery explosion. "Brace for impact," Lyra shouted, her voice rising over the alarms. The Elysium's shields flared brightly, but the damage was still significant. The hull groaned under the stress, and sparks flew from the console. Alaric's heart raced as he watched the devastation unfold. The Kryloth fleet was disorganized, their forces collapsing in on themselves. Without their flagship, they lost their commanding power. "Is it over?" Alaric asked, his voice strained. "We've crippled them," Lyra replied, panting. "The remaining Kryloth ships are retreating. We've won." The silence that followed was deafening. The fleet of Kryloth ships, once a mighty and terrifying force, had scattered. The battle was won, but the cost had been high. The Elysium limped back toward the Velari system, its engines barely functional. As they approached Valar Prime, Alaric's thoughts turned to the future. The war was far from over, but humanity and the Velari had achieved something unimaginable. They had united to strike down a common enemy. Alaric stepped onto the bridge, the weight of what they had accomplished settling on his shoulders. The fight was not over, but this victory was a pivotal moment. The last king of Earth had led his people into the unknown and had forged an alliance that would change the course of the galaxy. As the remnants of the Kryloth fleet disappeared into the void, Alaric's eyes turned to the horizon of Valar Prime, where the sun rose over a new dawn. The future of two worlds, once on the brink of annihilation, now held the promise of something better, a future forged in fire, honor, and unity. And so, the last king of Earth stood, not as a ruler of a dying world, but as a king of a new beginning, ready to lead humanity into the stars. The final stand had been fought and won, but the journey was just beginning.